Welcome to Team Futurism. Today we're going to be talking about the Roald Dahl fiasco that took over the internet about a week ago. And this was a situation where Random House decided to release a lot of the classic Roald Dahl children's books like James and the Giant Peach and Matilda and others with the text pretty heavily edited. Basically sensitivity readers decided that, he was too offensive in certain regards for modern audiences. And so words like fat, ugly, and crazy were completely edited out to be more, just like kind, I guess. And there was a massive pushback where Random House, only a couple of days later decided that they were going to release everything edited, but also in another version of the classic texts. And this kind of like made everyone happy again. But at the same time, I think that this is a really important topic because it's, what does the future of literature look like if there is this feeling, this sensation at some level, in the publishing houses that everything is too scandalous and we need to edit everything down. My big top level question here is, what does the future of literature look like with this as the current environment? I do want to say, a couple of pieces here to pull out before we really jump into the conversation. Suzanne Nossel, the CEO of PEN America, wrote on Twitter that she and other human rights organizations were alarmed by the changes, which is interesting. This is a quote from her. "Literature is meant to be surprising and provocative. That's part of its potency. By setting out to remove any reference that might cause offense, you dilute the power of storytelling." I think that was a good quote. Just to give voice to the other side here, this is a quote. This is from, I think, the Daily Telegraph.
Speaking for the cuck libs out there, are you?
Yes. Speaking for the cuck libs, exactly. I can't remember exactly who wrote this, but someone like speaking on behalf of that side, and this was from today.com. Words matter. The wonderful words of Roald Dahl can transport you to different worlds and introduce you to the most marvelous characters. This book was written many years ago, and so we regularly review the language to ensure that it can continue to be enjoyed by all today. So, I don't know. Nothing about that literally calls to me at all. But let me just toss it to you, Devin. What are your thoughts on this whole matter?
Holy shit, man. I had so many feelings as you were just in the preamble. I guess my brain gravitates to the first thing is what happened to liberal people, where it was. I mean, we literally have had this complete polar shift where in the 90s and early 2000s Republicans were like rap music and violent video games are killing our country, and we can't allow our children to consume this stuff. And I feel like the liberal response was like, hey, free speech, man. And now we're in this post-pandemic period where we see liberalism blossoming into this strange, I don't even know what to call it. It is bizarre to me that you now see folks on the left calling for basically the censorship of speech in kind of a myriad of ways, and also just loving the idea of government control. And I think it's a really interesting. I'll peel back from the political element into, like, as an artist, it upsets me because if you are reading this book to a child, or a child is reading this book, you have to have a sense of history and context. We do that with everything. That is fundamental to the idea of literature. As soon as you get past 20 years ago into any classical literature, any English teacher worth their salt is going to explain to you that you have to view these things in the historical context in which they're set. And that is a really challenging mental exercise for a child and for adults. That is really hard to do, to put yourself in a time period where certain things were okay and certain things were not okay. But where does this go? Then are we, one of the examples was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Willy Wonka, Willy Wonka says, the line is like, I I took every Oompa Loompa, you know, every man, woman, and child from the Oompa Loompa tribe, and I brought them here. And it's dark, right? It's a dark. Contextually, it's dark. If you think about it for more than a beat, it's dark. If you gloss right over it, maybe you don't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to change. They wanted to change it to all of the Oompa Loompas came here of their own free will. And I'm thinking like, and then the question that the article raises is then, well, then do we have to add an addendum to the book of how are these people getting paid? And it's like, no, because it's slavery. There is a really dark aspect to all of these books. They're in, and Roald Dahl, a terrible person, like kind of like known to history as a racist and a bigot, and not a person that is held in high regard. Somebody that in a certain sense you have to separate their personality from their art and contextualize things in the time that they're written and explain the difficult parts of the book to children, right? Like if your concern is that children are going to be reading these books and that they're going to be troubled by what's going on, well, then it shouldn't be an unsupervised read. You should be able to be there for them to explain if we don't call people fat anymore, and you want to, and the substitution is enormous for fat, because fat is a slur in the modern time. I won't even get into my own opinions on that. If you need a child to know that, then you need to be the person that explains that to them, because you can't sanitize history to it eliminates the teachable moment. I think that's at the core for me, is, and I'll kind of rest my point there, is that when you sanitize historical fiction and fiction, and you remove the teachable moment, there is no lesson there. The lesson then is a very strange 1984 energy, where the lesson is whatever is real today is what's always been real. And that's just not how we learn. What's next? Are we going to go back to books about slavery, and we're going to start sanitizing the way that we talk about slavery, historical fiction that has to deal with, you know, enslaved people? That's really fucking uncomfortable to read, and we don't have any connection to that in the modern day in an emotional way, because we don't see that in the United States in the way that it's being represented. But are we going to go back and we're going to change the language around that because it makes people uncomfortable to read? That's absurd.
Yeah, I was really heartened just by the response from people across the Twitterverse. And I mean, these are all like lefty people too, who are like, I mean, Liv Boree, who's kind of a futurist, and I like her. She says, can't wait for the new sensitivity edited Shakespeare. Yeah. And I mean, clearly we're talking Roald Dahl, we're talking about children's books, but I mean, my God, like go back and read any literature, whether children's books or otherwise. Very dark, very insensitive, and very human and rich and glorious. And there's so much like richness that totally just gets removed the second you start having like lame-o people with like, you know, BAs in literature from Brown University going through here and like, ooh, someone might be offended by this. Like, imagine just like putting yourself in that mentality. This is the thing. It would almost be fun to do, to like have that job.
Hubris.
And just to like imagine, oh my God, what could the second you start doing that, you could literally be like, imagine someone being offended by anything. Like you could literally, there is a swath of people who are terrified of the idea of eating chocolate. Right. So you could have to take away the whole entire book, because some people don't maybe they're allergic to chocolate. Right. Maybe they had a health or weight problem because they ate too much chocolate when they were younger. Or maybe they're currently going through that because they love, you know, chocolate cupcakes. Right.
Right.
If you put yourself in this mentality, and I kind of hate slippery slope arguments, but like, which is what this is. But I mean, just like owning this mentality for a second, it's kind of fun to do, to pretend to be this person, because everything is hilariously offensive the second you start like having this mentality. One more quote I want to read. This is Ricky Gervais wrote on Twitter. He has posted a picture of himself, and he's like this, and he says, "This is me pondering whether they'll change any of the words I've used in my work after I'm dead, to spare those who are fragile and easily offended. Words like fat and ugly and cunt and fuck, and fat, ugly, greedy, pathetic, little stupid fucking cunt," stuff like that. I think that, you know, a little, just like side note here is that the people with the biggest personalities, who are in fact the people who shape our culture,
Yeah.
none of them are sanitized people. They just like can't be sanitized. Like think about Iggy Pop, think about, I mean, Nick Cave, like, name anybody who like is a culture shaper of a person. Maybe not actors because they're all just like lame people, but like aside from actors, the people who shape our culture, the big personalities, none of them are safe-ish folks. They're all over the top, and we need people to create culture to drive our culture forward. And you know you don't want to silence these folks. They can't be silenced, I would say. Like Ricky Gervais is a great example of that. One more note here is that like I'm kind of generally okay with like shielding kids of a certain age from anything that's too raunchy.
Mm-hmm.
But there already is a massive industry that already does this. If you buy
Yeah.
children's books, which I do regularly because I have a young child, they all very often are books that are classics that are completely rewritten with colorful pictures and just little snippets of dialogue. And so, for example, we have a Wizard of Oz book where Dorothy is a little cute black girl, right? It's kind
Cute.
of like, but that's fine. Like I have no problem with that, and it's rewritten to be like just the highlights, and it's not scary at all or anything, but it gets the gist of the story, and Dorothy finds her way home. It's very very nice and sweet. Guess what? That's a massive industry. Look at Disney. Look, I
Yeah.
mean, like we have the sanitized world. If you're worried about your
Right.
kid reading the word fat in Roald Dahl, don't have them read Roald Dahl. That's fine.
Yeah.
Roald Dahl incidentally also wrote a bunch of like adult sex books types of things. Super funny, super entertaining. Definitely recommend them. Like My Uncle Oswald is one. I got way into Roald Dahl a couple years ago. Read like all of his stuff. He's just a funny, clever dude, and yeah, a terrible person. Guess what? So is like basically everybody, especially loudmouths
Yeah,
shaping culture.
of a certain era too,
A
it's
certain
like,
era, exactly. Yeah,
God, go back like 50 years and these guys were wilding out, man. You know what I'm
right.
saying? Like, it's pretty hard to find a blameless gentleman once you start reaching far enough back into the American past. You know what I'm saying?
Like there's a simple principle here too, just to really make the whole thing simple. It's just like just don't. This goes to people on the left and the right. Just like don't edit books, don't touch books. There's something just kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
sacred about the written word, and the second you start like having caveats to that, it's no good. It's just not good. And that it's such a
I think,
very 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 simple principle, and everyone should agree to it because like you said, I remember when the conservatives were bleeping out every other word in rap albums, that sort of a thing.
yeah.
Hey, that wasn't cool either, and this isn't cool. So we can't go forward with that because imagine if we did go forward with this and we let the left get away with this, then the right would complain and they would get away with it. All of a sudden,
Right.
everything sucks and is boring and is like just made for Sunday school, and that's not fun or anything.
Yeah, I find it really strange that as we move into the future, this idea of supervision is becoming more of a powerful and palatable idea in our culture. And it's been served up to us from the left and the right. But this idea that we need to be supervised and that people aren't smart enough to make their own decisions, and especially that people aren't smart enough to parent their children correctly. And so we need to supervise what children are understanding and learning. And to in a weird way, that's partially true. There is a lot of people out there that shouldn't have had kids and they don't give a fuck about what their kids know and how their kids are being educated, which sucks. It also you can't fix it that way. You can't supervise everything that everyone is consuming. You can put a higher societal onus and burden on parents to parent their fucking children. That is to me at the core of so many of these things. The trans issue, the don't say gay bill, a lot of this stuff is targeted towards children. And it's like, if you don't want your kid to go to a trans story time hour, that's a really easy thing to avoid. They're not they're not just they're not setting up circus tents on every street corner and trying to read your kids books in drag. Like these are small contained events, and if you have a hard time supervising your child, then The government can't step in for you. Society, culture can't step in for you. And furthermore, if you have a hard time supervising your own behaviors and your own habits when it comes to what you're looking for in literature or on the internet, or that's a you problem. That's a personal problem. And I do find that there is, as social mores are beginning to fragment into subcultures, and we don't have a cohesive sense of societal value, it is posing a lot of challenging. It is creating an onus for people to be thinking more critically about their choices. You can't just kind of float through this cultural soup and there's bumpers on the bowling alley, and there's no bumpers anymore. You can just bam slam the gutter and not hit a single pin on your way down, and that's challenging. That's
I guess
challenging.
To channel a conservative view here, just to put the view on the table, I think that there is a difference between books being published and not versus entertainment appearing at a public school or a public library, because people do feel like, it's not just like, I don't want my kids seeing like this kind of made for adult entertainment, but like marketed towards children thing, but like my tax dollars funding that. So I am paying for that person to show up at that library and do this thing. I think that there's a little bit of an argument there. I actually kind of get that. I'm kind of with you that I also don't care, and it's not the biggest deal in the world, but it's also like, I'm a little bit, sketched out by people like doing adult entertainment for children, because like you see these things of like conservatives bringing their children to Hooters, that's like the counter example.
Yeah.
That's probably not great either, but like Hooters is also a private establishment. No one's tax dollars are paying for that Hooters. This conversation gets so goofy, but yeah.
Anytime you get into the argument of my tax dollars, like you threw yourself into deep water, because you have no idea where your tax dollars go, right? Like it's when you pick a single issue to be like, well, if my tax dollars are going to that, I'm like, yeah, but your tax dollars are also going to absurd places. Your tax dollars are funding insane atrocities throughout the world, and also funding crazy shit happening in your own country. And if you want to cherry pick that one thing that you're upset about your tax dollars going to, I'm like, I just in that specific argument, I really struggle to like validate that argument.
No, like I broadly agree with that, but I also think that I kind of want people to really channel that energy where they're like, I don't want my tax dollars going to this,
sure.
That brings people out to vote, and it actually gets society to change in good ways, because we have too many dum-dums who don't think about that in the context of, I don't like that happening, that war overseas or whatever it is, and my tax dollars are technically funding that, so I'm going to vote against it. I think that that's good. I think that that's a thing that is
can be a motivator.
Yeah,
I feel you. I think that there's just a lot. I think that, the big rebuttal to the censorship push in the 90s and the early 2000s was, but they boiled it down really simple. If you don't like what's on the radio, change the channel.
Oh my God, exactly. I do completely agree with this.
That has to be so core to our understanding of culture writ large. Is if there is something that you do not like about the way that something is unfolding culturally, whether it's in your town or in the culture at large, you have a million ways to escape that. You can literally be an agoraphobic shut-in. You could not consume a single thing if you don't want to. And if you are getting outraged about something that is not impinging upon your personal freedoms, you're doing that recreationally. You have no real footing to be outraged about anything unless somebody is showing up to your door and stuffing it down your throat, and nobody's doing that. You have to just be you have to be at your own tempo, and you have to understand that if something is bothering you, you can avoid it, and you don't need to fight it in a cultural sense.
Can I ask, because I don't know.
Yeah.
Did anybody ask for this edited Roald Dahl thing? Did anybody in the culture? Or, because I have seen that there was an article like I skimmed the other day about how this wasn't done by sensitivity readers. This was done by them as a marketing ploy to just sell more books. Probably there's a lot of truth to that. But like, I just can't imagine who is there anybody like how quote left do you have to be reading Roald Dahl and be like, oh, we need to get the publisher to publish an edited, like literally is there anybody who was desperate for that? I mean,
it makes me think that there's like the same out of touch old white dudes that are like running like major financial institutions that are probably like Republicans have their analogs in like publishing houses where there's like the same Joe Biden ass like out of touch old white dudes that are like, well, liberal culture is moving so fast and we need to harness the wind of this moment, you know? Like
yes.
everybody's like, no, fucking stop, just die, you know? Like you can't even understand what's happening anymore. You're like grasping at these fragments of straws and trying to construct something meaningful out of it. But I don't know, maybe it's just the sluts of the of capitalism too, where they're just, you know, they see the cultural moment and they're like, well, everything is, you know, this is the way that culture is moving. We're trying to be really sensitive to everybody that's okay. Let me just say one thing too, because I think I haven't said this and I think this bears being said. Fat shaming is stupid. And a lot of the things that they're doing at heart, I get the intent of it. Maybe not their intent, but the kind of the marketed intent, which is to spare people who are of differing abilities and different. We do have to acknowledge that is something that we struggled with forever as a culture, that we
Yeah.
have been really bad about shaming fat people, shaming people that are neurodivergent, shaming people that have disabilities. We really have struggled with that, and people of color. Holy shit, you know, racism, bigotry, women. I mean, good lord, you know, we've really we've run a shameful gamut of making people feel like shit for the people that they are. That there is some space where those two ideas meet, where we do need to be just fucking cool to people, and we also need to be able to have fun with identity too. We need to be able to, it still needs to be a place where comedians and authors and artists can play and say fat, you know what I'm saying? And it's not something, and it's like, yeah, maybe there's a couple of people who are hypersensitized, and I think that ends up, that's your job. You know, if there's something weird with you, the coolest people on earth are the people that are like, yeah, this is like this weird thing about me and this is who I am and I love
Yeah.
it. You know, not everybody can get there, but that should be the trajectory. Like my favorite comedian, Stavros Halkias, he's like a fat guy, half bald, you know, and he's like loves it, just leans way into it. One of the biggest comedians in the world right now, and a big part of his act is just being like, yeah, I'm this fucking fat balding guy, and I'm like the life of the party. I'm awesome, you know, and so we can't bend over backwards for hypersensitive people, but we do as a culture need to be cool to people in general, you know. My final thought, here's my final thought, and I've been thinking about this for a long time because this issue of hypersensitivity has been an issue for at least a decade now, is that it's your job to not, it's your job to resolve the things that you're triggered by.
Yeah.
It's not society's job to resolve the things you're triggered by. However, people should be cool to you. You should bend over a little bit for people who are struggling with something. But this is the United States and it's not your responsibility to do that. And that's like where it all comes down to for me. You're a nice person if you do that. But this country is full of assholes and the world is full of assholes. And it's not their job to be not assholes. That's their personal journey. So it's like, you know, if you misgender somebody, it's not a crime and it shouldn't be regulated in a way that's litigious or legal. You shouldn't have to be respected by people because that's just not realistic. But you're an asshole if you don't. And you should be shamed for that. If you're mean to people and shitty to people, there should be an amount of societal pressure on you to say, hey, you should be cool to people. But it shouldn't be against the law.
Yeah, I guess that my final thought, actually pretty similar, is that I'm kind of in favor of language changing. I'm in favor of culture changing. It just does, whether anybody likes it or not. So we have to get used to that and accept that.
Yep.
But how do you know and appreciate that your culture has changed if you've gone back and edited all the books, you know, and all the movies and everything? We'll have no frame of reference. We'll literally have to escape, like learn other languages and escape our cultural bubble, which is also a good thing. But like we need to know where we've come from so that we can have some vision for where we should go. And I think that this whole, just sensitivity readers in general is not great for culture and literature and readers and all of us. So I think that it is kind of it's bodes well that this met so much pushback, and hopefully that just kind of continues. I think that it will, but we have talked about the current young generations are just more sensitive than we've ever known before. So maybe 50 years from now, like you won't be able to get your hands on a Roald Dahl copy. So I don't know, save your Roald Dahl, I guess.
I don't know. I've got hope. I think things will balance out. We're just in a weird contact zone right now, just now coming to a period where people are starting to say, wait a minute, you can't do that. And anytime there's a correction, there's an overcorrection. Every fucking time.
Every time. You're totally right.
Every time. And so it's okay. It's not, we don't want to let it stay overcorrected. We need to rein it back in, but there is some, you got to have some sense of kind of historical ebb and flow when it comes to things like this, where it's like, yeah, we're just now realizing, or I mean, the powers that be are just now realizing, and society as a whole is beginning to levy its weight on people that are doing mean and bad things to other people. And we just gotta, we're gonna be in the soup for a minute. We got to figure out what we need and what to take and what to leave. And I think going forward, it's gonna balance out. We'll be all right.
Absolutely, well said. Hey, well, till next time, Devin.
Adios, Peter.
All right, I'll see you soon.